Thank you so much for joining us this Friday morning. I'm Haley Bohall. I'm the Opportunity Manager in Research Development. So mostly I focus on limited submissions. Today is the limited submissions reviewer training and also implicit bias microaggressions training. We have just a few topics to talk about. I have a good review for limited submissions, kind of showing you what we walk through every year and showing you the review system. There's time for questions and answers. And of course, then we have a guest speaker for the microaggressions implicit bias area. I have Ira Bennett, who is our limited submissions chairperson. He's served for the past couple years and has another year or so on his term. And then Carla Makey is the assistant director in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So limited submissions is the transparent, equitable, and robust system here at ASU that serves for selecting the most competitive proposals for specific opportunities. And then we also provide actionable feedback for all of the submissions we receive. Ira, if you wouldn't mind kind of giving us the rundown for limited submissions here at ASU.
Thanks, Haley. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks, Carla. First off, limited submissions is a thing that we have to do, but that we hate that it exists. And it's when a funder decides that they want to limit the number of applications from a specific institution, which really puts a large institution like ASU at a disadvantage. However, we found, and Haley's shown me some data, that the process actually adds value to the proposals because of the feedback that the reviewers are able to give to the proposer. That's a sort of a level of attention that most proposals that the university puts out don't get. And so we find an actual increase in the funding rates of proposals that has gone through the review process. So, so that's great. The panel of people, all of you come from every corner of the university because it's an incredibly multidisciplinary challenge dealing with a limited submissions problem. And some of you find yourselves on panels that doesn't quite make sense to you, but the perspective is important. And we've found some of the most useful conversations have come from people that are able to look at the proposals from a very different perspective than, say, somebody with a very specific disciplinary concentration. It's really important, this training and this process is really important because in the end, we are judging our colleagues' work. And so as Haley sort of indicated in the beginning, transparent and equitable and open process to be able to do that is really important. And I deal with a lot of questions from people who got turned down about the process. And at the end of that, everyone feels that it was robust. And they may be disappointed that they weren't selected, but no one is challenging the robustness of our process. So thank you all for being part of this. Thank you all for being part of this training today. And look forward to any questions anybody has. Haley, back to you.
Thank you, Ira. Just to point at some of those facts Ira mentioned, last year, or in the last 18 months, we had 59 reviewers for 15 different panels. 15 panels means that we came together for 15 different unique opportunities. Limited submissions actually posted 388 opportunities last year, and we had almost 200 proposals go in, but 15 of those were reviewed with a full panel. And then 5 of those were awarded at the value of over 14 million. So we have 6 limited submissions pillars that kind of sets ASU apart from other internal review processes. I have colleagues across the country who we've discussed different processes and different systems for reviewing internally. And I think these are the 6 things that sets us apart. We are transparent. We have lots of our policies, or all of our policies, posted publicly on our website. We talk about them often. We host kickoff events. Last year we hosted 7 kickoff events that had 93 attendees. These kickoff events are for select opportunities, and it gives us an opportunity to share competitive intelligence information or sponsor-specific information for those opportunities, for those solicitations. It allows us to also hear from past awardees so the current applicants can have a better understanding of what's expected. We have a reproducible process. So like I said, we posted almost 400 limited submissions opportunities last year, in the last 18 months. And we follow the same guidelines for each of those. So people should know what to expect. People have a guideline of what's going to happen, and we follow that process very carefully. We boast an interdisciplinary review. So as a comprehensive public research university, ASU has dozens of colleges and different schools that have experts in a variety of different fields. Each review panel is a mix of closely related experts and more interdisciplinary peers to provide that valuable insight. We also provide robust feedback. So during the review process, all notes and comments are provided to the applicant, whether or not they're selected to move forward. And so hopefully they can use that information to refine their proposals. And then we measure everything. So I track the number of solicitations, how we post it, when we post it, what the outcomes are, and this gives us more information so we can continually improve. Who are the reviewers? Well, that's you guys, of course. We have over 100 volunteer faculty reviewers from almost every college and school. So a few schools who have people who are more ad hoc. These folks are always nominated by the research deans or self-nominated. If you have colleagues who are interested in doing this, we always welcome more. Each year, we ask the research deans to review the list and provide new names or provide additional names. And then, of course, when appropriate, we have experts that we can add. How are reviewers chosen for each panel? First, I look at the area of discipline the solicitation is in and try to find people who are closely related to that field. I find people who have experience with that sponsor or possibly with that program specifically. Maybe they reviewed with the sponsor previously at the sponsor level. And I also look at availability. Like I said, these are volunteer faculty, so your timing and your availability is always considered. We appreciate all the time you put in for them, and we understand that if you have other conflicts, you might not be able to do everything. How is the review organized? So once you're selected to be on the panel and you agree to it, we ask that you read the solicitation and the criteria that's provided. And then you also provide an overall score for each application that's given. You comment on strengths and weaknesses. You provide a comment on how well the proposal fits with the solicitation. You provide comments that you think would improve the application for the sponsor. And then you, of course, come to the panel meeting. So the panel meeting is something that we hold virtually now. Each reviewer is expected to attend, and so we work on scheduling and availability with that. And then we discuss the applications and make the determination what's recommended to be moved forward to the sponsor. Reviewers are always asked to comment on all the applications that they ranked exceptionally high or exceptionally low, either way. And also, this is the perfect time for you to provide any strong opinions you might have or any additional information you have. All of our reviews are done online on the InfoReady platform. It's a web-based system that allows you to access it from wherever you might be. If you're traveling or if you're away from the office, it's perfectly accessible. Reviewers are given access when you're assigned to that panel, so you have access to the applications that you need to see. And then, of course, it uses the ASU single sign-on system, so you don't need to manage a different username or password. It's all the ASU right information. And this is where you would input your scores directly into the system. You're able to print them out if you'd like to and handwrite them or highlight what areas you like, but you can also just use the online system to type in your notes. That's kind of the rundown for limited submissions and like the general overall process. I'm happy to take any questions now if you want anything answered, or you can save them to the end. Not seeing tons of questions. Let's see. LJ, is there anything in the chat?
There are no questions. I think you're ready to go on.
That's fine. So that's perfect. I will stop sharing here. And I'll let Carla share her information now, and we can move on.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we should all be looking at the same thing here. I am from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and for the next little bit of time, I'm going to talk about implicit bias and microaggressions, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple ways. First, just really generally and broadly, because this information is certainly applicable to us in our personal and professional lives, no matter where we are. But then I also want to focus in on the role that you will be doing as part of this group and this panel, and that is when you're engaged in the process of evaluating either other materials or applications or someone's research proposal that they're putting forward. So I'll be talking about it in those two ways. But here is our agenda. And I will just say I am working from home today, and I have two of my loudest dogs in the room with me. So let's hope that there's no stray noise from outside that they get triggered by. But I also have other people working in my house. So hopefully the background noise will be to a minimum while we're here. But as we all know, this is sort of the way things work right now. But I'll provide an introduction and also an invitation or a challenge if you're the type of person that likes to accept challenges. And the core of our conversation will be about bias and microaggressions. And then I will leave everyone today with some recommendations and suggestions for overcoming and confronting bias should these happen. So first, just a little bit about myself and my area. So as I mentioned, I'm in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and we are a department underneath our central human resources. So that is the unit that I work out of, and some of the things that we do in my area, certainly any type of diversity, inclusion initiatives across the campus community for our employees. We oversee the university's annual affirmative action plan. And then we also have another portion to our department that we evaluate any type of workplace accommodation requests for employees. So oftentimes, individuals at the university are very familiar with our student accessibility group, or our group formerly known as the Disability Resource Center. Students would engage with this group if they needed any type of accommodation in the academic environment. In my office, we work in a very similar way, but with employees, if they should ever need some type of accommodation in their work environment, in their workspace, they can interact with us. And then we also do faculty job postings, and that again is related to our affirmative action plan. And I have, so just a little bit more about myself, I've been at the university, it'll be 16 years at the end of this year. And I have experience both on the employee side, but also on the student side as well, working with our students in advocacy and assistance role, and also related to student conduct matters. So I have this invitation for you, or you can think of it as a challenge. This type of work, this type of training requires a lot of reflection. My guess is that what I share today and what we talk about today will stay with you for the rest of the day. And I certainly hope it stays with you well beyond that. But as we're sort of learning together here, this may be new information for you. You may be familiar with some of these concepts. And of course, we all have our own personal experience with these types of issues as well. So reflect on yourself, right? How does this impact you? Oftentimes individuals will start to recognize maybe there is something that I have said or done that was unknowingly a bias, or I unknowingly said something that was a microaggression. Reflect on your area, your unit, the work that you do here within the organization, and maybe this work that you're doing as a volunteer is different from the other responsibilities that you hold across the organization as well. And then also think about your interaction style, your engagement style, your supervisory style. How do you interact with colleagues, coworkers, individuals that you're learning to meet with for the first time, right? Reflect on that. What I know is that creating a culture of inclusion requires intentional efforts and actions. Oftentimes we look to leadership to be the exemplars and set sort of what that culture is. But on a day-to-day basis, we all have our own personal role and responsibility in sustaining and maintaining that culture of inclusion. Or in the absence of leadership, creating this, we really have to work to define that ourselves and create that on a daily basis. I encourage everyone, I invite everyone to continue this dialogue. There's so much to learn about individuals' experiences, particularly for individuals who have experiences that are unlike those that we have personally experienced. And commit to learning, right? We're in a higher education institution. I hold continuation of learning very near and dear to my heart. I hope you all do as well. And there's a lot more to learn about these topics. So I have a question for everyone to open us here. If you were to leave wherever you are at right now, maybe you're in your office, home, wherever you are, how far would you need to travel to find others that look like you, or maybe someone that speaks your native language, or if there's a meal, a favorite family recipe that you enjoy making and, for yourself or for others, how far would you need to travel to a store that has the ingredients for that particular dish, or maybe products that you use on a regular basis? So feel free to use the chat to share out how far you would need to travel. Oops. And my chat view is gone, so I need to try to figure it out. Oh, here we go. I can see what you're saying. Yeah, so there's some responses coming in. You know, not very far, a block or two, 4 miles, a quarter mile. Someone literally within feet, next door, around, and then someone says probably around the corner if they're in a particular place, if they're in Europe. Otherwise, maybe they would have to go very far. So next door, within a quarter mile, a few blocks, and maybe it depends on the question that's being asked. Someone says 5 steps for the first few questions, but 1,500 miles to find food or a store with some native foods or foods that they enjoy eating. Yeah, so certainly some variation here that we are seeing. For some individuals, they would not have to travel very far at all. For other individuals, they might have to travel great distances, and maybe it depends on what question we're trying to answer. So you saw what some of your peers said and how far they would need to travel. Maybe those experiences are very similar to your own, and maybe those are very different indeed. But just think about that. And also, what about other individuals that you interact with on a daily basis? Are their experiences like yours, or do they have a different type of experience? We talk about some of these very basic things. Finding someone that looks like them, being able to speak a native language, and also familiarity of food and foods that we like to eat or products that we use on a regular basis. So thank you so much for participating in that conversation. I know that there has been, since the summer really, this increased focus and attention on particular topics, such as social inequities, social injustices, race relations. We're hearing about a lot of these things, but these are certainly not new conversations, even though it's very pervasive in the news and in our own conversations that we're having. There's a few dates on this screen here, and these are all dates that are from US history, so United States history. And I just want to acknowledge first that social injustices have been happening well before the first date on here, 1865, and certainly they're not limited to just the United States, right? This is globally, there have been inequities, injustices, and things that continue to happen. But we have here, so we're starting at 1865, 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which ended or abolished slavery here in the US. 1920, we just celebrated 100 years of the 19th Amendment, which granted women in the United States, all 50 states, the right to vote. But we do know that there were some states prior to this that did allow women to vote. Even after 1920, there were many states that did not permit all individuals, both men and women, the right or the ability to vote. And there's still a lot of voter suppression that continues to happen to limit individuals from engaging in this civic responsibility, civic duty that many of us have not ever had to worry about. Brown versus Board of Education, a landmark Supreme Court case in 1954, ending segregation of our school children in public schools. And then in 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed. So federal laws providing protections to individuals against discrimination and harassment based on their certain characteristics, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, those types of protections. And then in 1990, so we're celebrating 30 years this year of the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Again, providing legal protections for individuals who have disabilities, both in public and private sectors of society. And then in 2015, right, Supreme Court ruled that same-sex marriage would be legal in all 50 states. And this summer, right, another real big landmark case with the Supreme Court, they ruled that 1964 Civil Rights Act that provided protections for individuals on the basis of gender or sex does include gender identity and sexual orientation. So these things are continuing to happen within our lifetime. There's a lot of history here, and the history is continuing to happen. I have just a couple other dates to compare, contrast against some of those, right? When we think about first aeronautic flight, the Titanic sinks well before women are granted the right to vote. Barbie doll was introduced in between desegregating schools, but before Civil Rights Act. And if you wanted to purchase a Barbie doll, you had two choices. It was a light-skinned doll, light-complected doll, that had either brown hair, brunette hair, or blonde hair, right? Those are the two choices, and certainly not representative of everyone who may have wanted to play with a doll at that time, and still today as well. The internet was invented literally mere months after the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? Already rendering some of this obsolete, that there were now new ways to think about technology and accessibility when it comes to technology. This continues to be a conversation even now, that we have to look at protections for individuals and make sure that there's some broader accessibility there. And then the iPhone was released in 2007. So I have one here on my desk, two actually, right? A pocket-sized computer in our hands. And that happened 13 years before some individuals were granted the same level of protections that many other individuals have been able to enjoy or not be concerned about throughout their entire lifetime. So conversations are still happening about these things. This is not new, but it is important to understand, and not just understand the differences among one another, but to acknowledge those differences, celebrate those differences, respect those differences as well. What does that mean to have a lot of different individuals working together? We'll talk about what that means in terms of diversity here in a few slides. We want to work together effectively, harmoniously, be productive, and have this environment of inclusivity. There's certainly a difference between what diversity can mean, right? Do we look at diversity as, yes, we have all sorts of different representation, and that's one way that you can look at it. But when we're talking about inclusivity, it's that everyone is a part of this process. Everyone has a voice, they have capital, they have the ability to engage equally in their work, in their research, in their academics together. All of this helps build credibility internally and externally with an organization. And that's, when you think about the work that we do here at the university, that's really critical, right? We want to have students think of ASU as the premier place to get their degree from. We want to be able to attract top faculty and professors and staff and leadership to this place to contribute. And also we want to partner with individuals, with external agencies to continue to develop things. So our reputation is critical in that. And then self-awareness, and we're talking about implicit bias because it's unconscious, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. You have to have some self-awareness in order to try to reduce that. So being aware, being mindful of your own biases is part and parcel for trying to reduce them or overcoming them. And we don't want things to escalate to discrimination or harassment. So here are some benefits of a diverse workplace. These are all from research. It shows that diverse work teams are more productive, have better performance than teams that are less diverse, and diverse teams are more creative and innovative. And this makes sense. The more individuals that you have around the table that have different experiences and backgrounds and perspectives and education, they are going to generate, that group is going to generate more ideas than maybe you would have been able to think of on your own. So kind of no brainer there. But it all leads to problem solving faster, more consistently. And this employee engagement sense of belonging is really important when we're talking about inclusion, and a lot of benefits come from employees that are actively engaged in the workplace. Sense of belonging is really critical when we're talking about being able to attract and retain top talent, allowing students to progress and persist to graduation, all of these things that we would want for individuals that are coming here to work and learn and engage in research. That reputation again, and reflecting our population. The university's population is very different from the demographics of where our physical campuses reside. And that's true even among our campuses that are located in metropolitan Phoenix, right? There are some demographic differences based on where each of our campuses physically reside or geographically reside, but we attract individuals from across the globe, across the world. And so our population really needs to reflect that level of diversity as well in terms of our employees. And there's that broadening the network, right? Donors, volunteers, individuals that want to continue to do business with us. Sometimes when we think of diversity, we default to characteristics such as race or ethnicity, maybe gender, age, but this graphic, this puzzle piece here just shows that there are so many different ways of looking at diversity in addition to those particular factors, right? Our skills, our experience, our education, our language, and the ones that I think are really critical for this group, when we're talking about a group of individuals that are coming together from across disciplines, across units and organizations that are on a committee together or on a panel together, right? What is your discipline, your research style or research approach, your background and your thinking style, perspective on things? That all lends to such rewarding opportunities for different perspectives and different opinions and ideas in this work that you are going to do. Well, let's get into the heart of the topic here. We're talking about implicit and unconscious bias. So there is an estimated number, 35,000, of representing the number of daily decisions that the adult brain makes per day. And that's a lot. That's a staggering number. I was actually talking about this with someone and they pointed out that there's over 200 decisions that we make every day related to food alone. And when I heard that number, I first thought, well, that seems like a really small number, because I feel like I'm always thinking about what I'm going to eat next or what I should make or eat. But then I thought, no, 200 decisions about food alone a day, that's still a pretty big number. So I don't know if it's Friday afternoon, maybe we're feeling the weight of a week's worth of 35,000 decisions that we've had to make every day. But this is very quickly how our brains make decisions. There's information around us all of the time, all of this sensory information that our brain is trying to process and filter and make sense of, right? We're compiling all of that. And then we make a decision, and that decision may mean that we say or do something, and other times it's a thought that we have. There's research that shows that there's over 11 million pieces of information per second that our brains are processing unconsciously. Consciously, our brains can only process about 40 pieces of information per second. And those numbers are staggering. First, 11 million pieces of information seems like just an incredible amount of sensory information that we are receiving. We live in an increasingly complex world. But the fact that there's such a gap between how much we can consciously process shows sort of we have some limitations in what our brain can do. And our brains make these decisions very, very quickly, literally within the blink of an eye. And what we know about the way that our brains make decisions or evaluate information is that we are all interested in self-preservation, right? Getting to the next day. So our brains will make decisions that are safe, that are rewardable, pleasurable, things that will allow us to persist to the next day. And we are going to avoid things that are unfamiliar or unknown. We don't know the risk involved there. We can't properly assess the risk or the level of threat. Things that do appear to be threatening or our brains perceive to be threatening as well. And what's, I think, really fascinating is that the part of our brains that are also responsible for evaluating threats, they hold memories connected with emotion together. So this sort of gets pulled into that deep storage of our brain. We use that information when we need to recall very quickly in the future, right? So our brains are very good at recognizing pattern and using pattern and previous information in order to make these decisions moving forward. So I have an activity for everyone here. You can stay on mute, but just say, I'm gonna have a list of colors. If you could just say out loud, it works really good if you say these words out loud, the color of the word, and I will display them here and give you just a quick minute to look through those. So read the color of the word.
Yellow, red, purple, blue, green, black. Red, green, yellow, purple, black.
Perfect. I hear someone reading out loud, and so you're welcome to as a group. I actually tried that before with a group, and it's a little bit difficult across Zoom. If we're all together in the room, it's actually quite beautiful, but across Zoom, it might be a little bit difficult. So thank you very much for someone who was not on mute. We could hear you. That was helpful. So I'm going to give you another list. And again, say the color of the word out loud, and maybe someone else wants to come off of mute and we can hear in. All right. Well, how did that go? And Rebecca pointed out in the chat, it's the Stroop test. And yes, that's absolutely what it is. So how did this second list go? And I will bring up, here are the words that I asked you to say out loud. What did you think? Yeah, much slower. I'm assuming that's the second list, that the second list maybe was a little bit more difficult. Maybe you had some challenges. Maybe you got a word wrong. Haley says that you had to think about it more. And there was some hesitation when thinking through that second list. Jean thought they were the same, no problems there in terms of maybe how it was, or maybe you felt as though they were the same. So this does require a few assumptions. First, that we all can read the words in the English language, and that someone has the visual acuity to tell what color is on the screen. So a few assumptions are required in order to do this. And Mark, yeah, so it was a little bit of a test, maybe how much coffee, how alert you are, how quickly your brain is working, and also you had to really think about it. So that's true, and that is what was discovered in this, is that when we think about this in relationship to bias, our brains had to work harder for that second list, right? Something didn't match the expectations. In the first list, at some point in our lives, someone pointed out the color blue and red and purple to us, and then we had an understanding of what those words meant. And then we were taught how to write the word or read the word, and we've been able to associate that. Every time we see blue, we know exactly how it's spelled, and we know the various shades of blue. But on the right side of the list, there was something that it was not what we expected, right? And that is a wonderful example of our brains having to work harder when things don't match our expectations, and that directly relates to bias. So bias means that we have these thoughts or attitudes towards individuals, and they happen unconsciously without our conscious awareness. Oftentimes when we're meeting people for the first time, it's based on characteristics, things that we can assume about them. maybe their appearance or their gender, age, race, ethnicity. And these beliefs are very much influenced by the associations that we have made throughout our lifetime, a lot of it happening very early in our lifetime as well. And so if you think about where you grew up geographically and who your neighbors were, what your community looked like, where you went to school perhaps, and who were your teachers, who were your peers in the school, who were the leadership, who was on the executive team, or the leaders of your school or your organization, other types of exposure to diversity. And we know that the media continues to be a very large influencer of associations that we make. Bias, it can serve as a foundation for stereotypes and discrimination, prejudice. But so just to be mindful of that. Obviously, one of the concerns when we're talking about unconscious or implicit bias is when we have behaviors that start to negatively impact another group. Sometimes unknowingly that can happen, and that would be problematic, right? We don't want anyone to experience a negative outcome or consequence as a result of a bias. I do want to highlight the difference between implicit and explicit bias. So here's a couple examples here, right? Implicit, again, meaning that unconscious, things that are happening unconsciously. So maybe this type of scenario would happen if someone were exhibiting an implicit bias, right? Not thinking to ask a staff member who has young children to assist with a evening event or weekend event, versus an explicit example would be questioning a male employee because they are requesting to take 12 weeks of parental leave, which employees are entitled to take. That would be sort of a difference there. And then another example, right? Assuming a student's major based on some characteristic about them, right? Gender, race, ethnicity, age, perhaps, versus something explicit. And we have certainly seen this happening, how there's been a response to individuals, particularly violence and increase in harassment towards individuals that are perceived to be Asian American or perceived to be persons of Asian descent. So this is continuing to happen, and that's an explicit example of a bias. Let me ask you another question. What do you think of when you hear the word shark? What are some thoughts that you have? You can either share out, come off of mute, or put something in the chat.
Baby shark.
Baby shark. Now we're all going to have that song in our head. Shark attack, Jaws, their fins. Maybe that's what we're used to seeing, or be on the lookout for the fin. That's the only thing you can see above the water. Jaws, maybe a person, right? A loan shark, a card shark, right? This ruthless investor, someone who acts like a shark, which I think we're assuming is predatory, as Mark points out. Jaws, great examples. Maybe you thought of some of these, right? Jaws, that was definitely mentioned a few times. We see their teeth in pretty much every picture is really emphasizing the shark's teeth. Even in the Shark Tank logo, there's a bite or a chomp sort of taken out of the K, and even just how those sharks look seem very aggressive. I certainly wouldn't want to be in the water. In the Jaws poster, we have this very predatory looking shark, right? It's intentionally out there looking for humans to eat as part of their diet. And even we have Bruce from Finding Nemo, who was by all means trying to be a converted shark and not eat fish as part of the diet, but did default to some of those natural shark tendencies on occasion when there was the occasion. So had to work very hard against it. And we see these teeth, right? The menacing, I think, teeth, rows and rows of teeth in each of these images here. Let me ask you this question. I can get my computer to work. Oh, I didn't ask it. Well, let me ask you right now. Has anyone ever been bitten by a shark? Anyone ever been bitten by a shark? No. Sometimes there has been someone who's been bitten by a shark. No, so no one's been bitten by a shark, at least not anyone that I'm seeing just yet. But we may all we default to maybe things that we have learned in the media about what a shark acts like. And that may have persisted into real fears, right? Maybe we don't go swimming in the ocean too far, right? We don't really enter their habitat for fear of being the victim of a shark attack. But as some of you probably know, or we learned through the annual Shark Week, humans are more of a threat to sharks than they are to us, believe it or not. And they don't really want to prey on humans. Humans are not part of their diet. It does happen on occasion, yes. And usually when it happens, it's very much a sensationalized thing within the news, right? A shark attack or a shark bite. And so that helps fuel the fear, along with some movies that we have as well, to make that association for us. So here are some characteristics of implicit bias. Biases are pervasive. Everyone has them, but it does not mean that if we have a bias, that is what we truly believe. It could actually be quite contradictory to our own beliefs and own values and how we live out our lives, even if we have a bias. Biases don't have to be related to a protected characteristic, but we know that we favor our own in-group, individuals that are familiar to us, that are like us. Those are individuals that we are going to favor. But these associations that we have learned throughout our lifetime, they can be unlearned. Our brains are very malleable in that regard. Harvard Research does a study, and they look at bias. They have actually a free bias test that you can take if you're interested. Spoiler alert, you're probably going to have a bias. I think, as I mentioned, everybody has them. But they use that information to look at how biases are changing. And there is research showing that biases are reducing in the areas of sexual orientation and race or ethnicity, and that they are staying stagnant or increasing in other areas as well. But it is good to know that we can unlearn these things. And there is the bias blind spot. So this is the tendency to judge others for having a bias without feeling as though we ourselves have biases, but we do have them, myself included. I do this work, I research on this, I learn about this, I teach on this topic, and I have biases that come up from time to time, but I believe that I have a very good self-awareness. So when it happens, I think, oh, that was a bias, and I try to understand it so I can make sure that it doesn't impact anyone negatively. Let's talk about a few ways that bias can happen in the workplace. One of the common ways that bias can enter is through the recruitment process. And this actually happens well before you start to receive evaluation application materials or start to look at these materials that someone's submitting. It could be the language on a job posting or where that job is being advertised. When you do receive application materials, there's a lot of research that shows that someone's name on a resume can actually impact whether or not they're likely to progress through that process. Are they going to be called for an interview or not? Individuals that have names that are not in the dominant majority are more likely to experience this bias. Candidates with an accent or perceived to have an accent may also experience bias, or someone who requests an accommodation for going through the process. In the workplace, we have the highest number of generations that are working alongside one another right now. And issues that happen socially are also playing out in the workplace environment. It's not sort of an environment where those things are not happening. In fact, I would think probably prior to the pandemic and probably prior to the fact that our work is now being done in such different ways, a lot of it being done remotely, we were probably working alongside one another in our offices and in our buildings, maybe even more so than the amount of time that we would spend in our own homes with the people that we live with, or our family or our friends. So a lot of time is spent with our colleagues, and that can bring up comments about age or someone's ability or skill, right? Perception of if they will be able to do the job, whether they have a lot of experience or little experience. And then other judgments may happen as well. Someone's position or their title, they may be given more credibility as a result of that, or where they went to school, the credentials that they have, right? Does that make them more credible or have better skills and qualifications than someone who doesn't, and that would certainly be a bias. Compensation disparities, we continue to see and learn about this as well. Higher education is not immune from compensation disparities, and there's all sorts of other examples, which I'm sure you can think of as it relates to your particular discipline, the work that you do as well. But let's talk about evaluation, right? The work that you are going to be doing. Bias can happen when we are looking at reviews from other individuals. If that's part of the application process, oftentimes it's part of the promotion and tenure process to look at peer reviews or student evaluations. Those can be biased, right? If we all have biases, it's very possible that our reviews or our evaluations can also be biased. And how does that influence things? Perception if someone has family obligations, whether they're not going to be able to complete the work because of family obligations, or because they don't have family obligations, they suddenly can take on more of the work, and that's not a fair assessment. Labeling someone too aggressive or too passive, right? Gender normative expectations here on how someone should look, how someone should act, how they should behave and interact, or maybe even the type of work that they're doing, right? Like, you should or shouldn't be doing this type of research based on who you are. Looking at personality traits, maybe this is someone that you get along with or don't get along with, but that is clouding the ability to evaluate that individual or their work based on something that's not related to the task at hand. And then again, disproportionate work assignments. We see this a lot in the faculty side of things, absolutely can happen on the staff side of things as well. So when looking at the evaluation, right, who is conducting that evaluation and review? Is it possible that they are allowing bias to enter that situation? And again, student or peer evaluations might be biased. And thank you, Rebecca's putting up a link to an article that talks about evidence of bias in letters of recommendation. Thank you, that's so timely with what we're talking about here, right? How those peer reviews or letters of recommendations might be biased themselves. What types of activities is someone involved in? How do we evaluate research service teaching? Oftentimes those are thought of as very different types of activities, and there's different weight given to each of these. But if there's a sort of a disproportionate amount that someone is doing in one area that they haven't been able to have as much work in another area, how is that being how is that affecting their overall evaluation or score? Lack of mentorship opportunities can be one way that bias can enter into these areas as well. And then I think these probably are really critical for the work that you're doing. The research approach, is that similar to yours? Is that outside of your discipline, outside of your knowledge? What is the field of study? What is the type of study, and how do you feel about that type of work being done as well, right? Some of our own personal beliefs or values can enter into these types of assessments and of an evaluation. I'm going to talk and highlight a few biases here, but cognitive biases happen when our brains are trying to process that vast amount of information very quickly, right? The fact that we're trying to make these decisions very fast in a very complex world, we sometimes get that wrong, and that's when biases can happen. And then social biases are a subgroup, but I think you'll recognize these names here. You've heard of these. You have an understanding of what sexism, racism, ageism mean. Cognitive biases, you may have heard of some of these, and some of these may be new. I'm going to highlight just a few. Anchoring bias, this happens if you almost think of it as like setting anchor, right? That's kind of in the ground, and usually this happens when we're talking about negotiations or decisions being made. And individuals that have this anchor set, they usually don't go too far from where that anchor is, right? They don't, their thoughts or their opinions or ideas don't move too far from that set point. Now, this can happen in a couple different ways. One way I think it can happen is if you have your own belief about how something should be done, and you set anchor there, you may not be very open to hearing about other opportunities or other ideas that someone else may have. And so it's going to be very difficult for you to move from there because you've sort of set anchor and you're biased in how things have always been done or how you've been doing them or how you were taught to do something. This also happens a lot when in hiring decisions. So whether you're looking at another individual to say like, we want to hire the same person, right? This person was great, they were wonderful, and we are looking for that exact same person when that would not be very realistic at all. Or in salary negotiations, it happens all the time, which is why there's recommendations to not ask for someone's prior salary. That has really no reference point to the salary that you're able to offer for the position. So that's just another way that anchoring bias can happen. Conformity bias. This one happens in group situations. So if you are going to be on these panel meetings together, if individually you look at and evaluate scores, but then come together as a group to discuss and pick some finalists, conformity bias can really happen in those situations. So oftentimes it's happening because we want there to be group consensus in a pleasant, harmonious work environment. We want to fit in. We don't want there to be contention. Maybe we have a decision that we need to make and there's a strict timeline on it. So we don't want to have sort of a delay in making a decision. But this happens when we have ideas about something or an opinion and we suppress that in favor of what the group is choosing to do. In the image, you'll see there's an individual standing at the front of the table and they're asking everyone seated around the table, all those in favor say aye. And each person around the table, they agree, they all say aye, but that is not what they're thinking, right? One person is thinking, say it ain't so, and you've got to be kidding me, 1,000 times no. So all of these individuals seated around the table have concerns, but they all go along with this as a group. And I think that we are socialized from a really early age for this to happen. So in the English language, maybe you've heard some of these phrases before, something such as, don't rock the boat, don't make waves, or go with the grain, go with the flow, right? All designed to say, like, just go along with it and don't be the person to stand up and object or, cause sort of the disagreement among individuals there. So this conformity bias, I think, can happen and does happen quite a lot in those particular situations. Gender bias, this happens. I really like that there was this research study done where they asked, the researchers asked faculty members who were scientists, so male and female faculty members who were scientists, to review application materials from both male and female applicants. And those individuals had identical skills and qualifications, but they both rated the male applicants as more competent than the female applicants. And in fact, they said that they would prefer to hire the male applicant more than the female applicant, and they were willing to pay the male applicant $4,000 more. So why does this happen? Well, it's not because people are sexist or that they have a conscious decision to engage in gender bias. Gender biases usually happen because of our gender stereotypes, right? We make these associations throughout our lifetime, throughout our early life experiences. Maybe there's some historical things at play where we believe unconsciously or unknowingly, based on representation of what we've seen, that one gender is better suited for a task over another. So if we think about leadership positions, right, qualifications that we are thinking of when we think of a leader, sometimes we default to thinking about a male in that perspective, right? That we want a leader to be decisive, we want them to be assertive, we want them to be confident, and those words and characteristics are oftentimes used to describe males versus women, right? Warm, caring, nurturing, kind, collaborative. Those words are oftentimes used to think about in women. And historically, there could be something at play here too, right? Who has historically dominated particular fields or industries or positions within fields or industries? Oftentimes when I ask individuals to think about education and medicine, it really depends on the level of leadership that we're talking about within that organization. If we're talking about K through 12 education versus higher education, what does that demographic split look like? Same thing with medicine. Are we talking about doctors and surgeons, or are we talking about medical assistants and nurses and other individuals within that? There historically has been some disparity there, and we know that things are changing as well. I just read this article in ASU Now by Professor Sosiera, which I thought was wonderful, right? So this was just in the November 25th ASU Now, maybe you read it as well, talking about the gender gap, right? Why does this happen? And they were looking at CEOs, so corporations, and what they found, again, is that individuals aren't making conscious decisions to hire men over women or promote men over women, but this really happens based on our ideas and our experience in observing individuals around us, right? And so they found that CEOs, male CEOs that had gone to an all boys school or an all men's college, whose family dynamic looked a particular way, these individuals had, their companies had a bigger gender gap than those who had a lot more diversity in their life experience, all the way from early life experience. And you can see here, opinions about these things are kind of locked in at a really early age. So by age 30, these associations that we've made could be locked in. So really important to be self-aware and also know that we can unlearn these things that we have learned in our early formative developments. We can unlearn them if we were not exposed to a lot of these differing ideas and beliefs. And the affinity or like me bias tendency to favor individuals who we have something in common with. And you don't even have to meet the person for this bias to happen. It absolutely can happen when you're looking at application materials or you're evaluating information, right? Do we have the same background, education, experience? I really like this research topic because it aligns with some of the own beliefs that I have as well, or would support other research that I'm doing, or same discipline that we're looking at as well. So you can favor an individual and maybe move them on or give them more weight or credibility based on the affinity or like me bias. And this one happens a lot in recruitment decisions as well. Microaggressions, I know that I am hearing this word more. When I ask people if they are hearing this word more, they say they are, that this is a much more common word that they're hearing in regular language. It's not a new term. It was actually coined in the 1970s. And at that time, it was really used to describe the experience of Black and African American individuals, but its more modern interpretation of that has really broadened to include all sorts of other groups, right? So individuals that are similar in some way based on their personal characteristics. But this is the definition of a microaggression: a statement, an action, a gesture. It could be verbal or nonverbal. And it is something that's usually regarded as indirect and unintentional, but it is behavior that is directed towards members of a historically marginalized groups or members of a non-dominant social group. And that can change depending upon what context you're talking about. And I want to highlight a couple of things first. That the word micro is in front of this word, which we understand to mean small, really small actually. But that is not the impact that it has on an individual. And I mentioned that microaggressions are often considered unintentional, but they can be intentional. In fact, there's a few different types of microaggressions, and microassaults are usually not considered to be unintentional. These are overt, and we're actually starting to really move away from a microaggression into like discrimination. So this is obviously very harmful, but the person who's engaging in this type of behavior, they know that it's discriminatory behavior, but they may not understand the impact that it has, and they may knowingly engage in this type of behavior as a result. So you can see a couple examples here, right? Saying to someone, speak English, you're in America, or making a joke based on a characteristic, race, gender, age, and then saying, well, I'm just joking. I don't really mean that, or it's just a joke, right? Those are examples of micro assaults. Micro insults, these happen much more frequently. And the fact that they are subtle and usually indirect, usually unintentional, and they happen so much in casual conversation, it can make these types of behaviors very difficult for other individuals to recognize. But the fact that they're happening so frequently to an individual and in casual conversation makes them that much more harmful for that person to experience, right? So telling someone, you're so articulate, or not referring to someone by their name because it's unfamiliar, you're not sure if you're going to pronounce it correctly. How did you get your last job, right? How did you get to do this work that you're doing, right? Assuming that it wasn't on their own skills and qualifications, there was something else at play there. And the micro invalidations, these are the most harmful types of microaggressions, right? Denying someone's experience, whether it's an individual or group of individuals. So not acknowledging that this has been the experience of someone, or dismissing that as well. So disregarding that there can be disparities in the workplace distribution. So that example, right, we just saw from research that there can be gaps in gender according to work based on decisions that are made by the CEO. So if we were to dismiss that and say, well, that's just because we've never had a lot of female applicants, or we are hiring the most qualified person, and it's, we can't control that other individuals are not as qualified as the person that we're hiring, right? And not acknowledging that there could be something else systemic going on there, right? Stating that racism doesn't exist, hard work or success is built off of hard work, right? Things that we know are not always true. And these are some examples of common microaggressions. Asking someone, where are you really from? You speak English very well. Here in the Southwest, we have a large population of Hispanic and Latinx individuals. So first, assuming that someone is Hispanic or Latinx, and then assuming that they should speak Spanish, right? What do you mean you don't speak Spanish? Touching someone's hair, or asking to touch someone's hair, or questioning something about someone's hair or their appearance, right? Oftentimes individuals with textured hairstyles or no hair are the recipients of this type of microaggression, this type of behavior. Saying, again, gender normative statements. She seems opinionated, he seems passive, without thinking of those qualities in the other person as problematic or less desirable, for example. And then this is just information to really show what that impact is of a microaggression. So if we look at the very top one here, you speak English very well, or where are you from, right? This is the message that it is sending to an individual. First, that you are singling someone out, typically based on their appearance, and that you're defaulting to the dominant social majority, which here in the United States is white and Caucasian, right? That is the dominant social majority, maybe not so much in terms of our population, the population numbers or demographic numbers, but when we think about that, we sometimes default to who's in leadership, who's in the position of power, and that has been white and Caucasian individuals. So thinking that that is the norm, anyone who falls outside of that is a foreigner, or is there's something different about that person, that is the message that could send. And then we have this micro-invalidation here at the bottom, right? I don't see color, I only see one race, the human race. I don't believe that racism exists. Here, again, you're sort of denying that someone's experience. And the challenge with this as well is that if you can't acknowledge that there are some concerns that an individual or group of individuals is being treated differently for some reason, then it's very difficult for you to address what those concerns are if you don't believe that they exist in the first place. This was a study that was done in Canada with Asian international students, but I just wanted you to get a feeling for how these students described experiencing a microaggression. And these are universal statements, right? These are things that are certainly happening outside of Canada and certainly not specific to Asian international students. This is very universal. So the experience of a microaggression, avoidance, and excluded, isolated, being ridiculed based on how someone speaks, right? An accent, feeling invisible, that individual needs were not taken into consideration because they were not part of that dominant majority group, right? What are their individual needs? So these are, you can see, very harmful for an individual to experience, even just once. And what we know about microaggressions is that they tend to happen much more frequently than other types of behaviors, more overt types of behaviors like discrimination and harassment. So some recommendations for overcoming these things. Self-awareness is so critical. I mentioned that at the beginning and a few times throughout. It really is. You have to be able to understand what your biases are, to try to understand those associations and make sure that that bias is not really impacting an individual or group of individuals in any way. I always recommend that find someone you trust that you can talk to about these things. When you notice that you have a bias, I find that it's really helpful for me to understand why I made that association, to be reflective, to see if it's ever potentially impacted a decision that I've made, and make steps to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. Be open to feedback. If someone comes to you and shares that they think that you may have engaged in a bias or you may have engaged in a microaggression, I hope that you're open to the feedback. As humans, it is very natural for us to get defensive and think, I didn't do that. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't say that. And that's very, very possible, right? A lot of times these things are unconscious. They are unintentional in the way that we're communicating, but be open to the feedback and learn from that and see if that helps increase your self-awareness of something here. And likewise, so speak up when something makes you uncomfortable or you see that there's other individuals are uncomfortable. Any change requires action. So this is where we have the ability to be really strong allies and bring something forward to an individual to let them know that their behavior is not in alignment with our values, with our beliefs, with our mission here as well. Stop using positive stereotypes in your recruitment, hiring, evaluation groups. Use group committees. Be mindful of that conformity bias. Make sure you have diverse representation. And I don't know if you can do this or not, but you can consider if you can remove personal identifiable information from any type of evaluation materials that you are looking at. You can use microaffirmations. These are just wonderful things I think that we should do on a daily basis. Anyway, make sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute to the conversation. Go around the room, go around the table, and make sure that people have been provided an opportunity to give input. If you notice that someone is not comfortable doing that in a group setting, you can follow up with them individually, or you can use other types of ways to gather and solicit feedback from individuals, even anonymously, can sometimes be helpful. Acknowledge when others have an idea. Don't take the idea as your own. So acknowledging the contribution of others is also a good way to lend support to someone else's voice when they have an idea. And oftentimes there's strength in that as well, to give support to another person's concept or project. Celebrate the wins when there's achievement. Learn how to pronounce someone's name. Learn their personal pronouns. You can see I put on my Zoom name here, my pronouns, she and her. Sharing them sometimes helps create the opportunity for someone to feel comfortable sharing theirs with you. And if you are not sure of someone's pronoun, you can refer to them by their name or just use a very generic pronoun as well. Continue to learn about these topics, continue to have the dialogue within your own teams, within your own units. And if you slow down before making critical decisions, there's research that shows that you can reduce bias just by slowing down. Think back to those words and the colors, right? The list of colors that I asked you to say out loud. The first list, very easy. It met your expectations. The second list, a little bit more difficult, probably a little bit more uncomfortable. You had to use more of your brain to get through that list. And that is an example for not only of how bias works, but also ways that we can overcome it. If we give ourselves just a little bit more time, we can pull our thinking into the more higher order level part of our brain, the more cognitive part of our brain, and we can reduce bias just by doing that. So those are some recommendations I have for you. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to, if there's any questions, or I know I went through a lot of information very quickly. If there's anything I can clarify, please let me know.
Thank you, Carla. I appreciate you joining us today. We have a little bit of time if anyone has any questions.
And I'll stop the recording because sometimes that spurs some questions.